Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOA on Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by the McPherson Tax Defense Group, 1-800-BEAT-IRS, beatirs.com. That's B-E-A-T, IRS, serving Alaskans, Americans since 1978 with 2 generations of tax defense attorneys. We're honored to have with us Genevieve Wood. She's a regular on TV. You've probably seen her talking about a number of different issues. She currently is the senior contributor for the Daily Signal. That's the online publication for Heritage. Started her career at NBC in 1991, went to Heritage in 2006, and don't worry, she is a conservative. You'll be completely convinced of that by the time this interview is over. Ms. Wood, thank you for being on the Joe Miller Show.
It's good to be on with you. Thank you.
So we're going to talk about the insanity gripping the nation, this concept of men dressed as women being able to use the restroom that your little girls go into, and even more insanity than that. There was recently an issue that arose in a high school, and this is not the first in the nation, where the feds threatened the high school that if they didn't allow a boy that decided he was a girl to use the girls' locker room, they'd lose funding. Tell us a little bit about what's going on, why it's happening, and where we're at with that school now.
Yeah, well, this is a high school, as you noted, in Illinois, Cook County, Illinois, so right in the Chicago area, suburb of Chicago. And basically, a young man who has decided he wants to be a woman and is calling himself transgendered said that he wanted to play on the girls' sports teams, use the girls' bathrooms, and basically be treated as a young woman. The school actually went along with some of this in the beginning. They allowed him to play on the school's girls' team, so he wasn't playing with the girls or with the boys, lacrosse team. It would be the girls' team. And they gave him full access to the girls' bathrooms. Now, I would have a problem with that, frankly, but at least there are stalls and there's privacy. But finally, his parents said that's not enough. We would like him to be able to use the girls' locker rooms, and by that meaning that's the changing room. So when girls are changing, their clothes to put on their sports outfits and so forth, they're saying he's got to be able to have access to that too. Now, the problem is there's not a lot of, privacy in that scenario. You've got people out in the open changing, and frankly, and I can say this is a young woman who, when I was 15 years old, I didn't frankly love getting dressed in front of other 15-year-old women, young girls.
Right.
But now you've got a situation where you've got a guy. Now, he claims he's a girl, but just so your audience knows, he is still a male biologically. Anatomy's all there. And they were very uncomfortable with this, and that's kind of what set up the showdown.
Right. No doubt. I think anybody in the right mind would be uncomfortable with it. So the parents insisted. I assume the school said, well, we're going to draw the line here, said no. What happened next?
Well, right. So the school originally said no and said we're not going to grant one particular person a certain right that infringes on other people's privacy rights, meaning the other girls in the locker room. But the ACLU got involved, the American Civil Liberties Union. They're representing this young man, and they basically threatened to sue. And the Department of Education, the federal Department of Education, stepped in, did an investigation, and they said, even though you're letting him play on the girls' teams, even though you're letting him have access to the bathroom, even though, and let me remind or tell your audience this, they also weren't making him use the male locker room. They said, we're going to set up a special bathroom with lockers for you so you can use those. The Department of Education said, no, that's discrimination based on sex. That violates Title IX, and that's where a lot of local schools get federal funding. And so the school was threatened with losing about $5 million in Title IX funding if they did not allow him to come in and use the girls' locker room. And at that point, the school said, to heck with everybody's privacy rights. We don't want to lose the money, and we're going to make room for him in the girls' locker room.
So let me just back you up. Before we get to the reaction of the girls in the locker room, Title IX can't discriminate on the basis of sex, but this administration, the Obama administration, has taken a very broad, interpretation of the word sex, and they've extended it to gender identity and all these other twisted things. Is there any judicial support for that at all at this point?
Well, not at this point. As a matter of fact, there have been 2 court cases dealing with this, one in Pennsylvania and I forgot one other state. And the courts had actually ruled against, saying this is not violation of Title IX. This is not discrimination based on sex. Again, even if you want to say, I'll go along with transgendered and I'll go along with this is a boy who says he's a girl and so forth, and has it, by the way, like I said, still is a boy from a biological standpoint and an anatomy standpoint, even though they're not discriminating against him, they're letting him playing on the girls' teams and all of that. This is the one place where they're saying, the Obama administration is saying, that is a violation of Title IX and sex discrimination. No courts have ruled in that way, but I will tell you the court in Pennsylvania that ruled against it in the other one, those cases are being appealed.
So, I mean, what about the others' rights? I mean, not just, of course, in the locker room, but privacy rights that people have in the bathroom, even those that are playing on these teams. I mean, obviously, physiologically, male players, bigger bones, stronger muscles. I mean, that's not even a question. That's objectively provable. What about all these folks that are on the receiving end of it? How do the girls react in the locker room?
Well, we talked to a number of them. There were about 5 different girls that we talked to that were part of the situation, and they all made clear that, look, we don't have anything against a particular person. One of them even said, I'd probably be friends with them if I knew them better. But I'm embarrassed changing in the locker room in front of this person. And let me be clear, they made, in the girls' locker room, they made a kind of a partitioned off area and put curtains up for him to change in. But the other girls, so they may not be seeing him, but when he walks out, here are all these girls that are in various forms, state of undress, they're exposed. And so again, this is saying, well, we're going to make room for this one person's demands while it violates the privacy rights of all these other young women who are in the locker room. And again, this is something, the school board, they gave parents very little notice that they were going to do this. A lot of parents, ones that we talked to, complained about the fact, this should have been something we discussed as a community. This shouldn't have been something that all of a sudden the federal government is involved in. I mean, after all, local schools are supposed to be local, governed by parents, the community, and school boards. But the school board, I think, got frantic because they thought they were going to lose all this money.
Well, it seems like to me what needs to happen is a number of these kids, their parents, need to sue. I mean, and I haven't really tracked all the case law and this stuff, but I would assume some of that's already at the trial court level. Some activists. Are you aware of any cases that have been filed to protect the privacy rights of those that are harmed by these new insane policies?
Not one is specific to this case, not aware of that. But I think you're absolutely right, Joe. There's very likelihood that if it doesn't happen here, and there's a group that has started. It's called, I think it's D211, which is the name of the number for the school district there for privacy. There's an activist group that has started. Whether they're going to be willing to go up against the ACLU and, frankly, the Obama administration at this point is a good question. I mean, it took a lot for even, frankly, these young girls to speak out. They just spoke at a school board meeting about a week ago, and one of the young women said, I was actually scared. I mean, because I didn't want to show up at school the next day and people call me names and say I'm homophobic and saying, I'm not nice and so forth. But she said, I just really felt it was important to stand up for my rights. So, there's a lot that goes on into this kind of thing, and I am sure this will not be the last case that we see because it's not just those in favor of privacy who've gotten active here. When the school board did hold their hearing, a lot of groups on the homosexual lobbying side and the transgender side sent a bunch of activists to this district. Not people who have kids in those schools, not even people that live there, but they're going to turn this into a political issue.
It tends to skew what we see as reality. The reality of it really is, I mean, when you go on the street, and of course this is not empirical, but the vast majority of people you talk to, in fact, I have yet to talk to anyone, and of course I've got maybe a little different crowd I interact with, but there's some leftists and, that I talk to every once in a while. Nobody's in favor of this. This truly is yet another example, I believe, of the elites shoving a new morality down the Americans' throats. And it really, frankly, makes this nation a laughingstock, too. I mean, it runs completely counter to common sense. How's this stuff getting done? I mean, why, when there's just such overwhelming opposition in the country to the concept of, like I said before, the base case of a man dressed as a woman using your little daughter's bathroom, why is this stuff still happening?
Well, I think a lot of times it happens from the very get-go because most people, they aren't even thinking about these things. And so, by the time they hear it's happening, it's already found its way into a courtroom somewhere. Again, this is never something that's put on the voters' ballot, because we saw when that happened in Houston this past election cycle, the voters of Houston overwhelmingly said, no, we don't want transgendered bathrooms. We don't want men being able to go into women's bathrooms. And by the way, Houston is a city that has elected a lesbian mayor twice. So you can't say, well, they're just a bunch of crazy, conservatives down there. No, you're right. The public's opposed to it. They've got to learn about it and stand up for their rights.
Yep, people got to push back. They got to get active. Folk in Anchorage, make sure that you engage in this proposition to reverse what the Assembly did. So the same thing's not going to haunt you there in Anchorage. Genevieve Wood, I appreciate everything that you're doing on the cause for liberty, particularly this issue. Appreciate your work at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks for being on the show with us.
Thank you.
Stay with us. The Joe Miller Show will be right back after these important messages.